Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Loft Media, episode 2. I thought that I would give you my life story in about 25 minutes today, just to put things in perspective so you know where I'm coming from and where we are heading together. I'd also like to thank you all, the people that have subscribed in the last week and those that have viewed Loft Media. Keep sharing it around. Truth and justice is our focus, where Loft Media is pushing where truth will prevail. So I'll just begin my story. Born in Melbourne, 1951. Dad was an engineer, Mum was a chemist, which she was before her time, being a woman who was a chemist. There weren't many female chemists back in those days. I had 2 other brothers and 1 sister, educated in the Catholic school system. I did enjoy school, but most of all I enjoyed all the sports while at school, which was tennis and swimming and football. And I finished matriculation, didn't really know what I wanted to do, and my dad said, look, you're good at maths, so why don't you do accounting? So I got a job with an insurance company and I studied part-time accounting because I did enjoy still playing lots of sports. And I look back and go, that was a great way to do my tertiary training. So that was at Caulfield Tech. In those days, the tech colleges taught accountancy, and we had a couple of brilliant lecturers, and one in particular springs to mind when this lecturer said, one day a box of beer is going to cost $50. At that stage, we were on $25 a week in a pay. And I thought, no, there's no way known a box of beer is ever going to be $50. Well, lo and behold, we're sitting at that mark now. He also spoke of the price of homes will one day be $1 million in Melbourne. And I used to think that was ridiculous. My parents paid £2,200, which was about $4,500 in 1950 for a house. And to think that would be worth $1 million. Well, lo and behold, basic homes in Melbourne are well over $1 million these days. So I was very fortunate to have that futuristic thinking lecturer. So I worked for the insurance company for a couple of years, found the work utterly boring and not relating to the accountancy work that I was studying. So I went out and I got a job with a private company, and that was the start of my launching into the accounting industry. I was given the great title of assistant accountant, so I thought I was it and a bit at that stage, but little did I know the work ahead of me was going to be absolutely boring. So for 3 weeks when I arrived, new boy on the job with this company in the building industry, they had piles of invoices that were in a room similar to this studio and up this high were mounted, many of them even unopened envelopes. They just paid lumps of accounts off accounts. They'd never really processed the invoices with the orders. So the business was in chaos. For 3 weeks, I remember going home each night, and some of the nights in tears as a young guy. And my father said, one day you'll look back and see that this has been great training for you. He didn't say a lot, my dad, but what he did say was wise. It was then, having got through that 3 weeks of just sorting invoices and orders and statements, that I realised the wisdom in placing a young person right into the foray of a business company. I knew at that stage of all the price of materials, the special prices and how things would run. So I learned a lot. And a couple of years later they restructured, and 2 of the fellas from that company went out on their own. One was an estimator, and one was a supervisor, and they engaged a part-time lady, and they asked me to do everything else. So that was a great advantage to go to a beginning business And it ended up being a very prosperous little business. To have a title would have been general manager over the course of 9 years. And it was a great learning time. We built that company and had a few subsidiaries, and we had about 50 staff in the finish, and we never lost a staff member, and we also never had a bad debt in the building industry over 9 years, which is something quite extraordinary. But that was a very well-run little business. My lifelong dream was to move to Queensland and own my own restaurant. So when my wife, we were looking to be married. This was around 1980, and I came up to Noosa to have a look at what restaurant would be, to buy a restaurant there. And I saw the plasticity of Noosa in those days, and restaurant owners were saying, it's 85,000, mate. No, we don't give out figures, you just buy it. And we all trade well and profitably, and I was well aware you do need figures before you buy a business to have a look at it. So, and the price of 85,000 back in those days was a ridiculously high amount. So a mate of mine said, have you ever thought of Hervey Bay? I'd never even heard of Hervey Bay. So I came up in the November of 1980 to have a look. And Hervey Bay at that stage was 10,000 people, 5 restaurants, 5 for 10,000, which means 1 restaurant for 2,000, and you can survive in that sort of market. I came back again at Christmas time because November was extremely quiet. Came back at Christmas time and the place was bopping. So this is back in 1980, and decided then, well, we'll give Hervey Bay a go. So wife and I got married, moved up from Victoria, and so began our journey in Queensland and in this region. By the time we got here in the May, there was 10 restaurants for the 10,000 people, so we knew we had a battle on our hands. Anyway, we'd already committed, so off we went. So we established Chris and Tina's BYO restaurant, built on the theme of where locals dine. We were not going to be dependent on tourists. It was more on the locals. And we built up a good clientele. We worked extremely hard the first year and just existed. The second year, you get a wage out of it, and the third year, you can look to expand, put on staff. That's the normal cycle for a small business. So I've been there, done that, and we did it. By then, we had a child, another one on the way, so we decided that the restaurant business is not what we wanted to raise our family. It is an exhausting industry to be in. So from then, I did a number of things and poked around, assisted a developer, set up a small accountancy practice. We got involved with helping establish a Christian school in Maryborough, which was the Maryborough Christian Academy, which is now the very successful Riverside School with hundreds of students and a great school here in Maryborough. I then was sort of doing lots of charity work, I call it that, during that time, and not really growing my own business. Kids, we then had 4 and another one was coming, and we thought, I better start getting serious about earning some income. So I fell back to the old trade of being an accountant, and I set up a small business under our house. Its focus was on helping people establish small businesses at the grassroots level. And I found that it just grew and grew and grew. And the rest is nearly a bit of history, but we moved the office from underneath my house to the Globe building in Maryborough, which was an old rundown hotel built in 1886. We employed 2 carpenters for 18 months, and they started at one end of the building and worked their way through, and finished up with a great building, renovated and useful, and many tenants over the course of time have used the Globe to begin their businesses and to thrive. So I do understand small business. So over that time, as we were growing, more staff, in about 2005, oh no, I did a few other things as well, established the Maryborough Tours bus. We set up a bakery, Abundant Life Bakery, in the what was the Christian Outreach Centre Church, which is now Victory. We've done a number of other little business ventures during that time, but the anchor of our income was the accountancy business. And of course, great staff came our way as well, and we built that up. In about 2005, we had 2,500 clients, and basically I can say the business was nearly out of control. We were just so busy. From a small accountancy firm, started from underneath my house, to get to 2,500 was beyond my thoughts. So we decided to divide the business at that stage in 2005, and we sold off about 1,000 clients to a couple of the staff that we had. So, and I call them the middle income and upper income people, the people who are well established in businesses. And then we regrouped and continued to establish on the theme of helping people establish small businesses at the grassroots level. So we dropped back to 1,500 clients, and over the course of the next 10 years, we built that up to 2,500 clients. Now, by about 2012, our children had grown up and they basically left home, and I thought, well, now's my possibility of having a go to get on council to give back to the community. I'd always been interested in economic development and the success of small business, and I think we were good at it. I mean, I can say that we had great staff who really got alongside businesses through the thick and thin of establishing businesses, and it's relational with clients, with family, with everything. Small business, being the backbone of the Australian economy, is a great industry to be involved in. So I put my hand up to get on council in 2012, and I got in by 2 votes after 3 recounts. So I knew that it was my destiny for then. So down to council I go, and what a learning curve it was in 2012. Within about 3 months I realised that this is not how I would run a business. I call council a business. So I began to look at how other councils did it. So I visited Bundaberg Council, Gympie Council, North Burnett, South Burnett, Sunshine Coast and Moreton Council. And I found the councils are run differently in different areas. The standout that I noticed was the Moreton Council had, sitting around the table of council, was 234 years of experience. So they basically told the public servants what to do. They had the experience of how to run a council. And they're like anybody who was a new councillor that joined, they just had to sit and take in the experience of the older councillors. One in particular is Brian Battersby, who's delightful gentleman, 41 years, an absolute gold councillor, and I call him a friend. He really advised me on the way. I just had to be patient and just keep learning how it all works. So the one thing that we had on the Fraser Coast back in those days, we only had 12 years of experience sitting around the table. So out of the 11 councillors, including the mayor, that's the number of years that we had sitting around the table. So it's like the board of directors are very inexperienced. And anyone knows if you're setting up a larger company, you want to have the best of the best on your board, because they're the ones that will steer the company forward. So we all had basically had our L plates on. Lots of learning. Later on during that period, there was friction within the number of councillors, and I call it the business-minded councillors versus people who have been on the public payroll. It's a bit of a division, and it's completely a different scenario. So I decided, being a councillor, you have very little influence in the way going forward. So I decided to stand for the mayor's job. So in September of 2015, pause. Yeah, it was September 2015. We sold the business. I did a business plan to become the mayor, and in March 16 I became the mayor. Little did I know what I was in for from March 16. So day one, I hadn't realised that the mayor has staff of one lady 4 days out of the 5 days in the week she works. So she works 4 days a week, and she was the assistant to the mayor. And I'm thinking, how can I be the mayor with only the limited staff of that? Now the other huge dilemma was, can you see this? So the mayor's office in the Hervey Bay Chamber is up in this corner of the building, and the CEO's office, probably it's in a long walk, is down in this corner of the building. So the CEO's office is there and the mayor's office is here. Every council I ever visited was the mayor's and the CEO's office are right next door to each other or across the hallway from each other. And there's usually 3, 4, 5 staff that are in very close proximity to the mayor and the CEO's office. So began my battle zone with trying to communicate with the administration of the council. Now, I'd just like to talk about the media and for a moment now. I had an early lesson learnt back in the late 90s. We had a great client, and I call him a friend, and probably I think one of the smartest men who ever entered Parliament in Queensland, in John Kingston. He was our local member here. Now, he had returned from overseas and was deciding the Conservative Party, what was the National Party, turned into the LNP, were wanting him to stand for the local seat. So he said, well, what do you guys stand for? And they said, well, we've got to get rid of Pauline Hanson. We've got to get rid of Pauline Hanson. He said, yeah, well, what's your policies? And they said, well, no, it's just we've got to get rid of Pauline Hanson. So he then went and studied Pauline Hanson. He went over to Kingaroy. She was at a meeting and she was talking, and to himself he said, I agree with that, I agree with that, I agree with that. He said it was all the old country party policies of Queensland. So he decided to stand for the One Nation Party. He got in, and he was one of about 12 from memory of the One Nation people who got in that huge swing in 1998. It went through a bumpy time, and it was around that time Pauline Hanson had to go to prison, and she later that ended up being null and void. But so the political pressures, I learned a little bit way back then. So John was a qualified vet, qualified pharmacist, ran an extremely profitable pharmacy here in Maryborough, and a man of extraordinary talent. And so I count him as a friend and also as a client. Now, as that campaign built up, there was the big push to say that Pauline Hanson was a racist, and that was the big push by the media. Now, I remember working with John, and John's wife is an Asian lady, Joy. She's from Laos. And also he had an Aboriginal secretary. And John, this is bizarre, I wouldn't join a racist party if that was the case. So the story goes that overseas newspapers came out. It was The Guardian, and they did a very honest appraisal of One Nation Party and also John Kingston in particular. But there was also 60 Minutes. I believe it was 60 Minutes, one of those shows anyway back then, and they came to town and they spent 3 days doing interviews of John and various people around town because it was a hot issue. John was diffusing that the One Nation Party was anti-Asian and a racist party. Anyway, it was ready to go to air, and we thought this is going to throw some sparks in the air, and then it was pulled. It never went to air, and I thought there is powers beyond the local medias who are controlling the stories that do come out. Well, haven't we seen over the next 20 years, isn't that the case, where the leftist side of media just portrays their own agenda, and if there's anything on the other side of politics, they just don't call it or show it or declare it. So one of the advantages now of the time we live in, truth can come from basic, the ground earth people who are walking around here, who are can tell the truth, can tell the stories without fear or favour. That's where we're heading. So at another time, I will fill you in on the local Chronicle newspaper, which was also extremely left-leaning, and I can tell you about its foundations and some of the editors that we had on the journey through, who were definitely persuaded to the left and not for truth and reality, and those that collaborated with the local Chronicle up until nearly now. Okay, well, you've learned a bit about me today, and where I've come from and where I got to be the mayor in March 16, and over the next following weeks there'll be parts that I'd like to share with you, particularly around the media and the media's influence, and also even in our campaign when from September, October of 15 through to March, how we were infiltrated within our campaign team, and the cause and effects of that. There's some interesting situations that happened then. Also, that will extend into a bit more of a glimpse into the media, which I do want to share about, and you'll see why media is so biased, because it's where they're being paid from. So we'll be sharing things on that. I would encourage you all also to, as we're coming up to an election time here in Queensland, an extremely important election that has ramifications for every Queenslander. There's some deep issues that are really needing to be confronted, and I think that the policies of the major parties need to be examined. So I would encourage you all to hop on the internet, look up the ALP policies going forward, look up the LNP policies going forward, look up One Nation policies, and if you're inclined you can look up the Greens, but I mean, to me the Greens are people that have just lost their way and are not really relevant in a future for Queensland. I mean, heaven forbid if they took charge, we're in deep, deep trouble. We may as well all vacate Queensland and leave the circus to them. So looking forward to next week. We'll chat further. Thanks very much for viewing.